So for many, a joyous moment, the return of former leader Laurent Gbagbo. And as you saw from those pictures there, a lot of people very happy to see him back in the country. Well, one person who's been watching and observing this event play out is news correspondent Leanne De Bassompierre. She's in Abidjan, and we join her now via Zoom. Leanne, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I guess the images that we saw there were partly expected.
Definitely, and as you would have seen, that there was a very, very heavy security presence across the economic capital, Abidjan, today, as well as in his hometown of Mama, where he's expected to go once he leaves Abidjan in the next few days. There was a very heavy security presence, especially at the airport, where he was given the presidential pavilion to be received, even though he was arriving on a commercial flight on Brussels Airlines. He was given a special section of the airport that is usually reserved for the president and any other guests that have come through on a private or a non-commercial flight. So he was given the space, but what many of his supporters tried to do is they tried to get into the space. They also tried to come in through the back of the airport, and that's when security services had to fire tear gas to disperse the crowds. Also, the major boulevard that leads to the airport, many of his supporters came out on foot, actually, from very early this morning. They tried to make their way to the airport.
I suppose for someone who's been away for so long, it's probably an emotional time for him, but for many of his supporters to see him again after so long.
It was a very, very emotional welcome at the airport. People were very overwhelmed with the emotion that they were feeling. Several people that I had spoken to, they'd been there from 7, 8 o'clock this morning, even though his flight was only scheduled to land at 3:45. They were there.
All right, it looks like Leanne's line is down a little bit, but those images that you can see are of Laurent Gbagbo, former head of state of Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, arriving in Abidjan today. And this is after more than a decade away, of course, spent a lot of time incarcerated at the ICC. He was eventually acquitted for crimes. But this is his first time back home, and many people probably felt that they wouldn't see this day for a long time. Leanne?
Definitely, it's been 10 years, and when he came off the flight, and already images were circulating from when he left the airport in Brussels and boarded his flight from Brussels to Abidjan, he was a shadow of the Laurent Gbagbo that they knew, that left Abidjan 10 years ago. So he was quite frail while he was walking. He didn't say anything to anybody at the airport. There was a lot of support. Security in his camp was not very secure. People were obviously trying to get a glimpse of him as he came off the plane. He got into a car, and they tried to, along the route, try to get a hold of his car, try to, just touch their previous former president. So there was a lot of emotion, and the next few days will be vital in what the next steps will be for what they're calling for is national reconciliation, and him being a vital part of that national reconciliation and longing peace in Ivory Coast.
So what is going to happen now? I suppose he's still onwards onto his hometown, which will probably be an even warmer and a bigger gathering.
Definitely, they've been preparing for months now since his acquittal at the International Criminal Court at the end of March. They've been waiting very patiently for him to come home. As I said, he is a shadow of his former self. It remains to be seen whether he will take an active role in politics or in his party. But one thing is for sure, that that his party will have to do a lot to try to consolidate the party again. There were 10 years, they lost a lot of ground. But what really came out today was that he does still have a very, very strong popular base in Ivory Coast. And a lot of them are young people with a lot of high hopes for him, for the party, for the country. And there's a lot resting on his shoulders as to what he will do next to try to provide them some solutions for their futures.
What is the government stance, position at this time with regards to Laurent Gbagbo?
So, you know, they'd been negotiating for several months. President Alassane Ouattara had said, well, he's waiting for the International Criminal Court to give its final verdict. Obviously, he's been in The Hague for an extra 2 years, waiting for the outcome of an appeals process. And so that finalized on the 31st of March. Since then, they've been negotiating with the welcoming committee for Laurent Gbagbo. And what the government spokesperson said after the cabinet meeting yesterday was that, you know, they'd been negotiating, they'd decided on certain things, but it seemed like the party had really jumped the gun and made several announcements themselves instead of waiting for the government to make those announcements. There was nobody from government there today as part of the welcoming committee. But as government said, the government spokesperson rather said yesterday that they see it as, you know, somebody coming home, like a normal person would come back to the country. Of course, we know that he's not a normal person. They were anticipating what would happen. But other than that, they haven't really said much. I think the government's also taking a wait-and-see approach to see what's going to happen in the next few days, what kind of rhetoric will come out of his arrival and what his supporters will be doing. And then we'll see whether the 20-year jail term that he was given in absentia will actually be upheld.
All right. I mean, he's supposed to be entitled to, I suppose, former heads of state privileges. Mm-hmm. But I guess with this sentence hanging over his head, it's difficult to tell just exactly what they will do. Although getting the presidential pavilion on arrival maybe is a sign that things are not as hard as might have been expected before.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there is the question of reconciliation, and he plays a vital part in that. So if the government wants to include him in that process, the negotiations will continue. And I think giving him all the privileges that would be allowed for a head of state, not arresting him at the airport, not taking a hardline approach, does show some warming up to the idea that he will be granted some kind of amnesty. So the next few days will be key, how his supporters will be controlled. Will they take to the streets? Will there be violence? We already saw some isolated incidents of violence today. People are very excited, and whether they can contain this excitement and whether they can be controlled to not let the streets of Abidjan and the rest of Ivory Coast turn into mayhem once again. It remains to be seen in the next couple of days how that will be managed. And thereafter, government, I'm sure, will pronounce on what the future steps will be.
Has he indicated at all when we're going to hear from him?
Laurent Gbagbo himself? Or
yes,
Laurent. So his camp said, he wants to get back to his hometown. They've been very mum on what the next steps will be, when he will be speaking, even with regards to interviews. He hasn't committed to any that I know of as yet. So I think it is also very emotional for him. Can you imagine being away from your country for 10 years? And he's essentially coming back to an Ivory Coast that is very, very different. Even just driving through the streets of Abidjan from the airport today, it's a very different experience. Huge infrastructure developments that have happened in the presidency of Alassane Ouattara. At least one more bridge has been built. The city has really beautified itself in the last 10 years, if I can use that word. And I think that it's going to be quite an emotional adjustment. So I think he's going to find his feet, and his supporters will want him to say something within the next few days.
Where's his wife?
It was quite a drama today, if I can say that. So there was still, up until an hour or two before he was meant to arrive, there was still this unclear messages as to whether she would come, whether she wouldn't come. The media got wind of the fact that she was at a nearby hotel, waiting for the green light to say that she'd be able to come to the airport. Eventually she came, and of course, she also has a very strong following as well. She came with their daughters, and she was there to welcome him. And I can tell you that it wasn't very welcome from his part. And by the time he'd actually reached so he came by car from the plane to the presidential pavilion, and by the time he reached there, she'd already been given orders, or I'm assuming orders, to leave. So she left very quickly with their daughters, and really it was not it was quite humiliating for her, I think. I don't think that was the welcome that she was expecting. But, they were a very, very powerful couple. I don't think that's the last we've heard from Simone either. So we will wait and see where that saga ends.
All right. Leanne, thanks very much indeed. And hopefully we'll catch up with you again because we think you might get a conversation with him in the next couple of days.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Thanks so much, Leanne.